October 2nd at midnight marks the end of the Jubilee year. The once every 49-year Jubilee has been an incredibly turbulent year. It began in January of this year when worldwide stock markets had their worst beginning to the year in history. Then, on June 24th, the day after Brexit, recorded the worst one-day drop in worldwide stock markets in history. And interestingly, that day was exactly 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, and 7 days since the end day of the Shemitah in 2008, which recorded the largest point drop on the Dow in history of 777 points. The number 7, of course, is intimately tied to the once every 7-year Shemitah. There isn't much historically conclusive data on the Jubilee and the stock market, so we've just been watching to see what transpired during the Jubilee year while expecting massive volatility. The Jubilee end day this year is on a Sunday, so we do not expect a market crash on that day, as stock markets are closed. However, there's an extremely interesting and bizarre confluence of events happening this Jubilee weekend. Here are the main ones. The Shimon Peres funeral in Israel. The one thing the Jubilee is inextricably tied to are events in Israel. The last 2 Jubilee years had major events occur in Israel. In 1967, Israel won the Six-Day War, and they rested on the 7th. And in 1918, Jerusalem was conquered by the British Empire. And so, it is of great interest that on this Jubilee weekend, almost every major Western governmental leader is in Israel. Barack Obama delivered the eulogy. The funeral drew delegations from 75 countries and such figures as former President Bill Clinton, President François Hollande of France, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, Presidente Enrique Nieto of Mexico, and King Felipe VI of Spain. We've predicted and commented on the list of strange occurrences happening this weekend. But what are the odds that on this particular weekend, most of the elites would end up gathered in Israel? The yuan SDR inclusion. On Saturday, the Chinese yuan, or renminbi, will be officially added to the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights basket of currencies. This means that the currency will be recognized as an international reserve currency, with China labeled by banking elites as an advanced or developed market, which is part of a bigger power shift away from the West and towards Asian countries. We've long speculated that this date, the day before the end of the Jubilee year, was chosen as a statement that globalization is moving forward and that China will be pegged to supplant the West. What is unclear is how this will affect the currency market starting next week. It's also of interest that it is being done on a weekend, which is typically when events that could shutter markets take place. It's interesting that Deutsche Bank is in dire straits as we enter into this Jubilee weekend. It should also be noted that numerous countries, including Germany, have national holidays where banks will be closed on Monday. Internet globalization. On Saturday, unless something unforeseen happens, the US will hand over the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN, to a multilateral body called the United Nations International Telecommunications Union, which effectively relinquishes US control of the Internet. As with the inclusion of the Chinese yuan, happening on Jubilee weekend, we think this is also a statement from the elites that power is being taken away from the US and being given to the UN. The idea is to expand the power of the UN, preparatory to making it the true repository of world government. World War III in Syria. The last Jubilee year occurred during the Arab-Israeli Six-Day War that the Israelis fought to reclaim Jerusalem. The Middle East's warring has done nothing but expand in the intervening decades. Now, with the war in Syria, the major powers are continually drawn in, especially Russia, which is beginning to confront NATO and the US directly. The US and Russia had come to a ceasefire agreement over Syria. However, US fighter jets attacked a Syrian airbase in Deir al-Zur, killing 62 Syrian government troops and injuring over 100. The US claimed it was targeting ISIS, but not so. Syrian intelligence even claims to have audio of US commanders coordinating with ISIS ground troops. So much for the US being anti-ISIS. World coming to an end. According to reports swirling around ISIS, fighters are preparing for a jihadi Armageddon, the upcoming end of the world. The idea is that U.S. troops are circling an ancient town which Muhammad supposedly predicted would be the site of the world's final battle, and which now looks as if it may be the center of an upcoming one. U.S. Special Forces and Turkish rebel troops are said to be just 3 miles from the small town of Berwick, Syria. And according to the Prophet Muhammad, the final hour will not come until an Islamic army defeats the Romans in that town. Many of the ISIS fighters interpret the US and Russia as the contemporary versions of the Romans, and thus are preparing for a final showdown. Black Moon. Jihadists aren't the only ones expecting the world to end. On Friday, September 30th, a rare black moon supposedly indicates the nearness of the final apocalypse. A black moon only happens every 32 months, and this black moon has been preceded by something even rarer, a ring of fire solar eclipse, where the moon falls in line with the Earth and the Sun above Africa, making it appear as if the sun had darkened. U.S.-Saudi relations in limbo. Congress on Wednesday overwhelmingly rejected President Barack Obama's veto of legislation allowing relatives of the victims of the September 11th attacks to sue Saudi Arabia, the first veto override of his presidency, just 4 months before it ends. The House of Representatives voted 348 to 77 against the veto, hours after the Senate rejected it 97 to 1, meaning the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act will become law. The vote was a blow to Obama, as well as to Saudi Arabia, one of the United States' long-standing allies in the Arab world, and will certainly have massive repercussions in the coming weeks and months. Jesuits to elect new Superior General. The Society of Jesus is to hold the first plenary session of its 36th General Congregation at the Jesuit Curia in Rome on October 3rd, the day after the end of the Jubilee. This is particularly interesting, as the Jesuits are known to be key power players in the New World Order and have been shunned and banned from countless countries over the centuries for their nefarious activities. Certainly we can discern symbolism in its occurrence the day after Jubilee. This is a very odd confluence of events, all on the Jubilee weekend. Even if nothing major happens this weekend, pieces have been put into place supporting additional globalism in this Jubilee year. It should be remembered that if the Jubilee is indeed a super Shemitah, that many past Shemitah crises and collapses, aside from 2001 and 2008, did not fall on the exact end date, but instead occurred in and around that time. For example, Black Monday in 1987, where the Dow fell 23% in one day, was about 3 weeks after the Shemitah end day that year. For now, we'll wait and see before speculating on any further actions and events. But this is a critical time period harbinging more difficulties and even catastrophes to come. The world's socio-political, economic, and military structures are being purposefully collapsed in preparation for a more global